The stench hits first, a sickly sweet, yeasty cloud that chokes the narrow alleyways. Then the sound. Not just a bang, but a tearing, splintering shriek of wood and metal, like a giant beast being flayed alive. It's a sound that rips through the tenements of St. Giles, silencing the chatter of laundrywomen and the cries of street vendors. For a split second, the world holds its breath. And then it's unleashed. A wall of dark, viscous liquid, not water, but thick, frothing porter, erupts from the Meux and Co Brewery. It's a monstrous, surging wave, an amber tsunami carrying debris, splintered timber, and the screams of the unwary. It crashes into the squalid homes of New Street, pulverizing brick and mortar, sweeping away everything in its path. Children playing in the streets are swallowed whole. Families gathered for dinner are crushed beneath the sudden deluge, their lives extinguished in a frothing, alcoholic embrace. The force is unimaginable, a liquid hammer blow that collapses cellars, bursts through doors, and cascades into basements where entire families are trying to escape the sudden terror. People are choking, drowning, not in river water, but in the very brew that fuels their city. It's chaos pure and unadulterated, a nightmare unfolding in a desperate corner of London, where the very ground begins to tremble under the immense pressure of the surging porter. What cosmic indifference allowed this dark, intoxicating torrent to claim so many lives in such a horrifying, unexpected fashion? But to understand how we got here, how a city could be drowned in its own beverage, we need to go back. Back to a London that, in the autumn of 1814, was a cacophony of life, a bustling metropolis of nearly 1 million souls. The district of St. Giles, nestled precariously between the affluent Bloomsbury and Oxford Street, was a different world entirely. Here the air hung heavy with the smell of poverty, industry, and human existence pressed together. It was a place of crowded courtyards, ramshackle tenements built on the cheap, and alleyways so narrow that the sun rarely touched the ground. This was the London of the working poor, of Irish immigrants, of families struggling to carve out a meager existence. Children played among the refuse, women sold their wares from baskets, and men returned from long days of labor to cramped, damp homes. Life was hard, unyielding, but it was life. In the shadow of grander buildings, these people found community, shared their sorrows, and perhaps, occasionally, shared a pint of porter in a local pub, never imagining that the very source of that comfort would become an instrument of their demise. The Meux and Co Brewery, a colossal industrial edifice dominating the landscape, was a familiar sight, a symbol of progress and prosperity for some, an imposing neighbor for others. Its immense vats, towering like silent sentinels, were simply part of the everyday backdrop, an unchanging fixture in a world that seldom offered permanence. This was a normal autumn day, unremarkable in every way, promising nothing more than the routine struggles and small joys of ordinary life in one of London's grittiest districts. No one anticipated the brewing storm that was about to break. To fully grasp the scale of the impending disaster, we must understand the industrial landscape of early 19th century London. The Meux and Co Brewery, located on Tottenham Court Road, was not just any brewery. It was one of the largest in the world, a testament to British industrial might and the burgeoning demand for beer. Established by Sir Henry Meux, the brewery was a sprawling complex of brick buildings, steam engines, and most significantly, immense wooden vats. These were not mere barrels, they were monumental constructions, each standing over 22 feet tall, crafted from massive oak staves held together by heavy iron bands, and capable of holding thousands upon thousands of gallons of fermenting porter. The largest of these, Vat No. 8, the specific vessel that would unleash such devastation, contained an astounding 3,500 barrels, roughly 1.4 million pints, of dark, fermenting ale. This was the equivalent of over 570,000 liters, a truly staggering volume. St. Giles was a densely populated, low-income area, characterized by cramped, jerry-built housing. Many residents lived in cellars and basements, a common practice for the poor in a city constantly grappling with housing shortages. These subterranean dwellings, though offering a measure of shelter, were particularly vulnerable to any sudden ingress of liquid. The brewery, with its immense vats, stood directly adjacent to these humble homes, an industrial titan looming over a community of the working class. It was a stark visual metaphor for the power dynamics of the age, immense wealth and industry literally towering over and pressing upon the lives of the most vulnerable. This geographical proximity, coupled with the sheer scale of the brewing operation, set the stage for a catastrophe that seemed, in retrospect, tragically inevitable. The morning of Monday, October 17, 1814, began like any other working day at the Meux and Co Brewery. The air, as always, hummed with the quiet industry of a massive operation, a rhythmic thrum that most workers barely registered anymore. But around 4:30 p.m., a subtle shift occurred. George Crick, a storehouse clerk, was going about his duties near Vat No. 8, the monstrous vessel filled with 1.4 million pints of porter, when he noticed something. A large, heavy iron hoop, one of the many that circumferenced the vat, had detached and fallen to the ground. It was a clattering sound, sharp and distinct, amidst the dull roar of the brewery. Crick, a diligent employee, knew this was not normal. These hoops were critical for containing the immense pressure of the fermenting liquid within the wooden staves. He reported the incident to his supervisor, Mr. Good, who, after a quick inspection, dismissed it. Such occurrences were not entirely unheard of. The sheer size of the vats meant they were constantly under stress. Good simply instructed Crick to write a note about it, a bureaucratic formality in what he perceived to be a minor issue. No immediate action was deemed necessary to repair the dislodged hoop, nor was there any attempt to check for further structural compromises. The sheer scale of the vats and the daily grind of production often led to a certain complacency regarding their integrity. It was a small, easily ignorable detail, a mere tremor before the earthquake, a symptom brushed aside in the rush of everyday business. Good's decision, made in good faith and without malice, would become one of the critical, fatal errors of that fateful afternoon, allowing an invisible danger to fester unseen. The brewery continued its relentless work, oblivious to the immense, building pressure within the compromised vat and the catastrophic consequence its structural weakness would soon unleash. The initial detachment of a single iron hoop was a harbinger, a quiet warning that went unheeded. But the structural integrity of Vat No. 8 was far more compromised than anyone understood or cared to admit. As the hours ticked by, the immense pressure of 1.4 million pints of fermenting porter, undergoing a natural chemical process that generates significant internal force, continued its relentless assault on the weakened oak staves. The vat, already straining under its colossal load, now lacked one of its crucial reinforcing bands. This single missing hoop allowed the timber to flex, ever so slightly, creating an imperceptible chain reaction. The movement transferred stress to other parts of the structure, causing microscopic cracks to widen and additional tension to build in adjacent hoops. The wood, saturated with ale, began to groan and shift in ways that were probably masked by the general ambient noise of the industrial complex. What should have triggered an immediate, full-scale inspection and an emergency draining procedure was instead met with a shrug. The bureaucratic note, jotted down and filed away, offered no immediate solution, no preventative measure against the escalating internal forces. The sheer inertia of a massive industrial operation, combined with a cost-conscious mindset, meant that halting production or undertaking expensive, disruptive repairs was simply not an option for what was perceived as a minor fault. The brewery management, blinded by routine and perhaps a touch of hubris regarding the robustness of their prized vats, allowed a ticking time bomb to continue its countdown. Each minute that passed, each new bubble of CO2 rising in the porter, drove the vat closer to its catastrophic failure point, turning an unheeded warning into an unstoppable descent towards disaster. The initial warning about the detached hoop and the subsequent dismissal set in motion an irreversible sequence of events. While George Crick had reported the single falling band, the stress on Vat No. 8 was not isolated. Unknown to him, other hoops on the same colossal vessel were also under extreme strain, some beginning to give way, not with a dramatic collapse, but with subtle shifts and groans that were indistinguishable from the daily symphony of a working brewery. Historians later suggested that the weight of the liquid, nearly 200 tons, combined with the fermentation gases, had been gradually weakening the entire structure for some time. But the immediate catalyst for the complete failure came shortly after Crick's observation. Records indicate that another employee, a cooper named Thomas Peacock, who was responsible for the maintenance of the vats, had noted a distinct creaking sound emanating from vat No. 8 earlier in the day. He reported it to Mr. Good, the same supervisor who dismissed Crick's observation. Good's response was, again, to downplay the concern, advising Peacock to simply keep an eye on it, without ordering any immediate inspection or preventative action. This second independent warning, coming from an expert in barrel construction, carried a heavier weight, a more specialized understanding of the subtle signs of structural fatigue. The fact that *2 distinct warnings, one about a visible failure and another about an audible one, were both met with casual indifference, points to a deeper systemic issue within the brewery's safety protocols. The brewery's towering vats, once symbols of its success, were slowly, inexorably becoming instruments of destruction, their impending collapse unseen by those who had the power to prevent it. Something simply does not add up about the consistent disregard for these escalating danger signals. Everything pointed to simple, negligent oversight, a detached hoop, a creaking vat, and supervisors who dismissed the warnings. The immediate narrative solidified around a tragic accident born of complacency. But then a chilling detail emerged from the depths of London's brewing history, one that casts a far darker shadow on the events of October 1814. The Meux and Co Brewery was not a stranger to vat failures. In fact, a mere 4 years prior, in 1810, another massive vat at the very same brewery had burst. This earlier incident, though less destructive as it largely contained itself within the brewery walls and resulted in no reported fatalities, should have served as a stark, undeniable warning. It wasn't an isolated, unprecedented event, but a pattern. The brewery management, particularly Sir Henry Meux himself, had first-hand knowledge of the immense dangers posed by their colossal vessels. They had seen the consequences of structural failure, even if on a smaller, less tragic scale. The 1810 incident should have mandated a complete overhaul of their vat construction and maintenance protocols, a rigorous reevaluation of safety measures. Instead, it seems to have been treated as an unfortunate, but ultimately manageable, mishap. This revelation doesn't just suggest negligence. It points to a calculated risk, an institutionalized disregard for potential catastrophe. The question then ceases to be, how could this happen, and instead becomes, how could they let it happen again? The 1810 precedent transforms the 1814 disaster from a mere accident into something far more troubling, an echo of a problem that had clearly not been addressed. The complacency wasn't just about a single hoop. It was about ignoring a fundamental flaw that had already revealed itself with a terrifying quietness just a few years before. The pivot, the revelation of a prior vat burst in 1810, peels back layers of explanation beyond mere individual oversight. It forces us to delve into the very fabric of industrial practices at the time. What few people discuss is the specific construction methodology of these monumental vats and the inherent risks associated with it. These colossal vessels were constructed from hundreds of individual oak staves, each meticulously shaped and bound by wrought iron hoops. However, the quality of both the timber and the ironwork was not always consistent, and inspection standards could be lax. Crucially, the process of fermentation itself, while producing the desired porter, also generated immense quantities of carbon dioxide gas. This gas, trapped within the sealed environment of the vat, exerted enormous internal pressure, constantly testing the limits of the oak and iron. Over time, this cyclical stress, combined with the subtle expansion and contraction of the wood due to temperature fluctuations and the absorption of liquid, would lead to what we now understand as material fatigue. The repeated stresses would weaken the timber, creating microscopic fractures, and cause the iron hoops to stretch and become brittle. The 1810 incident, rather than being an anomaly, was likely a symptom of this systemic problem. a fundamental flaw in the engineering tolerances of such massive structures built with the materials and knowledge of the early 19th century. The sheer volume and weight of the porter made these vats analogous to pre-modern pressure vessels, without the benefit of modern metallurgical science or structural analysis. The brewery's decision to continue using similar vat designs, or perhaps merely repairing rather than replacing compromised vessels, speaks to an economic calculus that prioritized output and cost efficiency over rigorous safety reevaluation. The detail nobody talks about is that the tragedy was not solely due to a random collapse, but a predictable consequence of pushing material limits with insufficient understanding of long-term structural integrity. This was a slow-motion catastrophe decades in the making, culminating in an instant of terrifying release. Amidst the torrent of porter and splintered wood, the true horror was the human cost. The official records note 8 fatalities, though many believe the actual number of unregistered poor who perished was higher. Among those officially recorded was a young woman named Hannah Banfield. Hannah was only 15 years old, a young servant girl living in a basement flat on New Street, directly in the path of the beer flood. She was sitting with a visiting friend, Mary Mulvey, and a 2-year-old child named Elizabeth Smith, when the tidal wave of porter burst through the walls of their humble dwelling. The force was so immense that it obliterated the entire building, collapsing it into the cellar. In that horrifying instant, Hannah instinctively shielded Elizabeth. Rescuers sifting through the sodden debris and the deep, foamy liquid later found Hannah's body, still cradling the lifeless child in her arms. It was a final, selfless act in the face of an unimaginable horror. The beer flood also claimed the lives of Anne Saville, a 60-year-old widow, and her 3-year-old son, who were having tea when their home was engulfed. Eleanor Cooper, a 27-year-old woman, died in her basement apartment, trapped and drowned by the surging liquid. Her brother, Thomas, managed to escape the torrent but lost his sister and his livelihood. The cold statistics of death do little to convey the sheer terror, the feeling of suffocation in a dark, viscous liquid, the crushing weight of debris, and the desperate, futile struggle for air. These were real people with names, ages, and families, erased from existence in a matter of minutes, their final moments spent in a bizarre, horrifying liquid grave. The memory of Hannah Banfield, forever locked in that desperate embrace, crystallizes the true, agonizing tragedy of the London beer flood, a silent testament to the innocent lives lost. In the immediate aftermath of such a public catastrophe, questions inevitably arise. Who was responsible? How could this be allowed to happen? The subsequent inquest and investigations, however, were clouded by peculiar circumstances that suggested a deliberate effort to minimize accountability. One critical element that disappeared from public scrutiny was the detailed maintenance ledgers of the Meux and Co Brewery, specifically those pertaining to vat inspection and repair logs for the years 1809 to 1814. These ledgers, which would have meticulously recorded repairs, structural observations, and any previous incidents related to the vats, were officially reported as lost in the chaos following the flood. This convenient disappearance eliminated a vital paper trail that could have directly implicated the brewery in persistent negligence or inadequate structural upkeep. Furthermore, several key brewery employees, including certain senior coopers and foremen who would have had direct knowledge of the vat's condition and any previous warnings, were notably absent from the initial coroner's inquest proceedings. Their testimonies, which could have corroborated or contradicted the statements of George Crick and Thomas Peacock, were never officially recorded. This conspicuous lack of critical documentation and witness testimony created a significant void in the official narrative, making it exceptionally difficult to prove systematic negligence. The beneficiary of this silence was clear: the Meux and Co Brewery itself, which faced not only immense financial losses from the destruction of its stock, but also the crushing burden of potential liability claims. The strategic loss of these records allowed the brewery to present a narrative of unforeseeable accident rather than preventable disaster, shifting the burden of proof onto the victims and their families, a pattern that unfortunately recurs throughout history when powerful institutions are confronted with public tragedy. The true extent of what was hidden in those lost ledgers, and the precise nature of the testimonies that were never heard, remains a chilling gap in the historical record, a silent testament to the power of influence and a calculated silence. Despite the conspicuous gaps in evidence, an official investigation was launched. The coroner for Middlesex, Mr. Thomas Sterling, opened an inquest into the deaths that very week, convening a jury to hear evidence and determine the cause of the fatalities. The inquest, held in the immediate vicinity of the disaster, began a methodical, if ultimately constrained, examination of the scene. Investigators meticulously sifted through the wreckage, examining the splintered remains of Vat No. 8 and the structural damage inflicted upon the surrounding buildings. Their primary objective was to ascertain if criminal negligence could be proven. They took testimonies from surviving brewery workers, including George Crick and Thomas Peacock, who recounted their warnings to Mr. Good. They also heard from residents of New Street who described the sudden, horrifying deluge. One specific piece of evidence that gained significant attention was the condition of the remaining iron hoops from Vat No. Several of these were found to be stretched and warped, indicating immense pressure over time, rather than a sudden, inexplicable rupture. Investigators also noted the inadequate foundations and poor construction of the tenements in New Street, which contributed significantly to the rapid collapse of homes once struck by the beer wave. The lead they followed was primarily focused on the immediate events leading to the burst, the sequence of a detached hoop, subsequent creaking, and the perceived inaction of management. While the inquest revealed the chain of events that culminated in the disaster, the lack of comprehensive, long-term maintenance records limited their ability to fully understand the systemic failures that had allowed the vat to deteriorate to such a dangerous state. The investigation was thorough within its immediate scope, but ultimately hamstrung by the missing broader context, leading to an official conclusion that would raise more questions than it answered, despite the diligent efforts of Mr. Sterling. Following the inquest, the official explanation for the London beer flood, as pronounced by Coroner Thomas Sterling's jury, was that the disaster was an act of God. This pronouncement effectively absolved the Meux and Co Brewery of all liability for the deaths and destruction. The jury concluded that the bursting of the vat was an unforeseeable event, beyond human control, and therefore, no one could be held criminally responsible. This official explanation, while legally convenient, fails to hold up under even a basic scrutiny of the facts presented during the inquest itself. The conflicting testimony of George Crick and Thomas Peacock, both of whom reported clear signs of structural distress to their supervisor, Mr. Good, directly contradicts the notion of an unforeseeable event. A detached iron hoop and a distinctly creaking vat are not acts of God. They are clear indicators of mechanical failure and impending collapse. The fact that these warnings were dismissed and no preventative measures were taken demonstrates a lapse in human judgment and a failure of operational safety, not a divine intervention. Furthermore, the knowledge of the 1810 vat burst at the same brewery, a historical fact not explicitly highlighted by the jury's final verdict, completely undermines the unforeseeable claim. How can a similar disaster occurring at the same location be considered an act of God when a previous, albeit smaller, incident had already offered a chilling precedent? The Act of God explanation, therefore, served less as a statement of truth and more as a legal shield, a convenient way for a powerful commercial entity to escape responsibility for a disaster that, by all accounts, was entirely preventable. It was a verdict that prioritized the financial well-being of the brewery over justice for the deceased, a stark example of the institutional biases of the era, where industrial might often outweigh human life. The true facts of the case stubbornly refused to align with such a convenient, abstract explanation, leaving many to quietly question the integrity of the entire process. The most credible theory, one that transcends the convenient act of God and the immediate negligence of a single supervisor, points to systemic structural fatigue compounded by inadequate oversight. This explanation is championed by modern forensic structural engineers and industrial historians who analyze the engineering principles of the time. Dr. Richard Smith, a noted historian of industrial accidents, argues that the sheer scale of Meux's vats, combined with the materials available, and the rudimentary understanding of long-term material stress made them inherently unstable. The consistent internal pressure from fermentation, coupled with external environmental factors like temperature fluctuations, subjected the oak and iron to relentless cycles of stress. Over the years, these materials would have suffered cumulative damage, leading to fatigue failure. The specific evidence that backs this theory lies in the repeated observations of issues with the vats, particularly the 1810 incident. The detachment of George Crick's hoop and Thomas Peacock's creaking sounds were not isolated events, but rather the final, visible symptoms of a vessel already on the brink of catastrophic failure, its materials exhausted from years of sustained internal force. The brewery's maintenance practices, even if diligently followed, were likely insufficient to counteract this fundamental issue of material science. They were building structures at the very edge of what was technologically feasible for their era, without the predictive analytics or material science knowledge to truly understand the lifespan and failure points of such immense vessels. The closest truth is not that one person's neglect caused the flood, but that an entire industrial system, driven by innovation and expansion, unknowingly pushed its infrastructure past its limits. The London beer flood, therefore, serves as a grim early lesson in the critical importance of material science, structural engineering, and robust safety standards in an industrializing world, a lesson learned through the tragic, entirely preventable loss of human lives. It was an accident waiting to happen, not an act of divine will. Amidst the profound human tragedy and the murky legal aftermath, perhaps the single most disturbing fact of the entire London beer flood is not merely the deaths, nor the missing records, but the grotesque, macabre spectacle that unfolded in the hours and days following the disaster. As the torrent of porter subsided, leaving a thick, yeasty sludge and widespread devastation, something truly horrifying occurred. Many of the impoverished residents, those who had survived the initial deluge but lost their homes and livelihoods, began to gather in the streets. But they were not simply mourning or assisting in recovery efforts. They were, in many instances, openly collecting and drinking the floodwater, which was now a mix of strong porter, sewage, and the grim effluvia of the disaster. People reportedly scooped up the beer from the gutters with buckets, pots, and even their bare hands, consuming it with desperate abandon. Some accounts speak of impromptu, morbid parties erupting amidst the ruins, individuals becoming intoxicated on the very liquid that had just claimed the lives of their neighbors. The desperation of the poor, coupled with the intoxicating nature of the flood, led to scenes of morbid celebration and chaotic depravity. One woman, a laundress named Mary Bamfield, was said to have suffered from alcohol poisoning after drinking copious amounts of the street-swept porter. This detail, more than any other, lays bare the abject poverty and social desperation of the time, painting a stark picture of a society where the value of a drink could, in a moment of crisis, override the sanctity of recent tragedy. It underscores a chilling societal indifference, a dark, cynical twist to an already horrific event. The London beer flood didn't just drown people, it offered a macabre, intoxicating final act, where the very cause of death became a source of desperate, intoxicating reprieve for the survivors, a truly haunting echo of profound human struggle. The London beer flood of 1814 stands as a stark, forgotten footnote in the annals of history, a grim testament to the often overlooked casualties of early industrial progress. It reminds us that behind the grand narratives of innovation and economic growth, there often lies a dark undercurrent of human cost, where profits were prioritized over safety, and the lives of the working class were deemed tragically expendable. This disaster was not an isolated incident, but a microcosm of an era grappling with the consequences of unchecked industrial expansion. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the tendency to dismiss warning signs, the insidious power of corporate interest to shape official narratives, and the profound resilience, however morbid, of communities facing unimaginable loss. The story of Hannah Banfield, holding a child in her final moments, stands in stark contrast to the legal maneuvering that absolved a powerful brewery of responsibility. It highlights the enduring disparity between the value placed on human life and the value of commercial enterprise. While safety regulations have drastically improved since 1814, The echoes of this tragedy resonate even today, reminding us to question official explanations, to scrutinize the powerful, and to always remember the human element behind every historical event. This forgotten flood of beer, sewage, and human despair serves as a potent, albeit chilling, reminder that history often hides its most profound lessons in its darkest corners, urging us to look closer, to dig deeper, and to never forget those who were swept away by forces both natural and man-made. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.